The indigenous peoples of North America did not view sexual behavior as a factor that contributed to wrongdoing in their society. It was the writings of Jesuit priests who lived among the Wendat Huron that gave their forefathers recognition in Europe. These priests were among the first Europeans to write about the Wendat Huron. The Wendat Huron are a Native American group that has descendants living in 4 different villages across the continent of North America. These towns are located in the states of Michigan, Kansas, and Oklahoma. The province of Quebec, the state of Michigan, the state of Kansas, and the state of Oklahoma are all home to these villages. It may seem surprising that a Catholic order of celibate men would examine the sexual lives of an entire population. Nonetheless, the Jesuits' desire to gather encyclopedic information about their mission charges has made them a great source on this topic. Bear, cord, rock, and deer were the 4 smaller countries or tribes that joined together to form the Wendat, which was a loose confederacy. The Wendat were located in what is now the Canadian province of Ontario. They were horticulturists who focused primarily on growing corn, beans, and squash, the products of which provided the majority of their dietary requirements. The majority of their diet consisted of corn, beans, and squash in various preparations. In addition, things like fish, fruit, and meat were eaten, albeit in somewhat smaller quantities. The majority of the work in horticulture, which included activities such as planting, weeding, harvesting, and grinding, was carried out by women. They were accountable for this labor. The clan was the most important social unit in Wendat civilization, and matrilineal ancestry was utilized to determine who was considered a member of each clan. This suggests that the clan to which you belonged was the clan of your mother rather than the clan to which your father belonged. People who were considered to be related to one another were those who were considered to be members of the same clan, and people who were considered to be of the same generation were referred to as brother or sister. It was considered extremely impolite and unacceptable in society to marry or have sexual contact with someone who was a member of the same family or clan. A woman's choice. It was revealed in a thorough study of the Wyandot people of the 18th century, who were one of the people groups who descended from the Wendat, that there were no marriages between members of the same clan. This was one of the discoveries that came about as a result of the Wyandot people being one of the people groups who descended from the Wendat. The Wendat engaged in the practice of exogamy, which meant that they married members of other clans despite the fact that their population was typically anywhere between 500 and 600 people. There existed a term for adultery, and it did occur. Nevertheless, for it to be deemed adultery, the 2 people involved had to come from different clans. It is acceptable to imagine that it was challenging to choose an appropriate person to spend the rest of one's life with due to the fact that each household belonged to a different clan and had anywhere from 8 to 70 people at any given moment. The Wendat were a trade tribe, and the men of the tribe would frequently paddle canoes across long distances to meet with their established trading partners who were from various cultures. It is also possible that they met the people who would become their spouses among their trading partners. If this is the case, the social ties that already exist between the trading partners and the nations have been strengthened even further. In the early records of Europe, such encounters are recounted from a male point of view, and little consideration is given to the notion that young women may have possessed decision-making authority in these settings. This is despite the fact that there is evidence to suggest that young women participated in such relationships. Women in Aboriginal society at the period had, on average, a higher say in the selection and exclusion of potential love partners when compared to their counterparts in European society at the time. This was the case in both selection and elimination. The Wendat people had a sexual culture that was substantially more open and permissive than the attitudes of the French settlers who arrived in what was then known as New France. This is in juxtaposition to the attitudes of the French settlers who arrived in what was then known as New France. The most convincing piece of evidence supporting this is the fact that there are written documents. Brother Gabriel Sagard, a guy who was a part of the Recollect order and was not a Jesuit, had the opportunity to observe one of the Wendat people's sexual ceremonies in 1623 and 1624 while he was living among the Wendat people. This took place during the years 1623 and 1624. This ceremony was considered to play a significant part in the Wendat way of facilitating the healing process. During the event, every little girl in the neighborhood would gather around the sofa of an elderly woman who was ill. They would be questioned one by one on which young man from the neighborhood in the following evening they would feel the most at ease sleeping with. After then, every young lady would indicate the young man of her choice, and the elders in charge of the rite would immediately let those young men know that they had been chosen. In the evenings, they would all sleep together in the same room with the sick woman, while the two chiefs at the opposite ends of the house would sing and rattle tortoise shells. The ceremony started in the evening and lasted all the way through to the morning after the next day, when it finally came to a close. It is critical to keep in mind that the young ladies, and not the young males, were the ones who ultimately decided on the course of action. This is an illustration of how significant women are in Wendat culture, as well as the respect that is accorded to them. Be enveloped in sex for me. In the year 1639, Jesuit Father Jérôme Lalemant wrote about this event. Nevertheless, Brother Gabriel Sagard did not mention the event by name in any of his publications. He related the story of an elderly gentleman named Torhinch, who was in the final stages of his life and had the desire to participate in a white dog ceremony. Cornmeal was required in adequate quantities for the event in order to ensure that all of the individuals who took part in the celebrations were able to be fed. There were also other ceremonies that did not have names, such as the ceremony of the anaconda, which entailed the mating of men and girls and took place at the end of a feast. Another celebration that did not have a name was the ceremony of the jaguar. In accordance with the directives given by Father Lalemant, there were to be a total of 12 girls, plus one more for him. Once the captains who had proclaimed the wishes were made public, people were motivated to fulfill the sick man's requests as swiftly as possible. The names of the young men and women who presented themselves for the ceremony were written down, and it was determined that it was their job to grant the dying man's most significant wish. After those who were concerned for his well-being had offered their congratulations and thanks, the man who had been sick expressed his own gratitude for regaining his health. Unfortunately, in this particular situation, the guy was not cured. By 1649, when the Wendat were on the point of being forced out of their original land, the Jesuits moved to prohibit this custom in order to stop it from being practiced. This was done in order to prevent the custom from being practiced. The vast majority of the Christian communities that formed a part of them declined the opportunity to take part in this ceremony. The various aspects of traditional Wendat culture are brought into focus by the rituals and behaviors associated with the ceremonies and customs in question. They present proof that the perspective that they had publicly conveyed regarding sexuality was one of celebration rather than constraint. It also provides the idea that the sexuality of women was considered as something natural, rather than as something that should be repressed. This is an impression that is reinforced by the evidence. The Wendat people did not have the cultural notions necessary to stigmatize the sexuality of women because the Wendat language did not contain words for either innocence or guilt. It is essential to keep in mind that this was an Aboriginal society at the time of first contact, before the influence of white male fur traders seeking compliant women, before the influx of alcohol into the fur trade, before the Indian Act gave men power and took it away from women, before colonial oppression and poverty had a negative impact on the Algonquian language family word squad, meaning female or woman, and before residential schools taught Aboriginal peoples how to speak English. It is essential to take this into consideration. We hope you liked this video. Subscribe to the channel if you're a history addict, and please let us know about civilization or time period we should talk about. Also watch another video here.